Hello, I'm Ralph Gable of the Electronics for the Inquisitive Experimenter YouTube channel. I'm so excited to have been asked by the KAiWEETS folks to take a look at their KM200s digital multimeter and tell you what I think about it. Now, before I even open the box or touch the meter, my first steps are to have my expectations where they need to be so I see the meter clearly as KAiWEETS sees it. If you have questions or comments, please feel free to add a comment to this video. If you find this video helpful, please click on the like and don't forget to subscribe. Now, let's begin our evaluation of this cool little meter. Well, I know that as a product design engineer of many years, that in order to properly evaluate anything, one has to know who the target audience is and what the use case is for that product. When this is not explicitly stated, one has to deduce this from two major factors. The first and most important are the built-in features. In the case of measurement instruments, this also includes the accuracy of the measurements made. On the back of the box, the KAiWEETS provide a list of all of the functions and the measurement tolerances of the meter. So let's take a quick look at these. First, this is a 4,000 count meter. This is an important point we must take into consideration when discussing the measurement accuracy of a DVM. More on this later. This KM200s claims to measure DC voltage with a specified accuracy of plus or minus 1% plus 5 counts. They also say that it measures true RMS AC voltage with an accuracy of plus or minus 0.8% plus 3 counts. Now, the question that I have here is one of frequency response. AC voltage between what frequencies are measured to this tolerance? And it's also kind of curious to me that the measurement accuracy for AC is better than that for DC. This is kind of a switch in my own mind. It also measures resistance with a specified accuracy of plus or minus 1.2% plus 5 counts. Now, you're hearing all these percent plus counts business, and if you're not familiar with this whole plus or minus percentage plus some number of counts business regarding measurement accuracy, then I will point you to my video on the subject for a complete explanation. I've put a link up in the corner and down in the description for you. Finally, it has a continuity mode and a non-contact voltage or NCV sensing mode. If you haven't had any experience with this NCV business, it senses the presence of AC voltage when you take the meter and hold it near the circuit in question. It beeps if it detects it. The question in my mind is, how much voltage does it take for it to sense its presence? Is a circuit truly dead if it doesn't beep? I'll be answering that question a bit later. The KM200s also has some other nice features like data hold to grab and hold a measurement for you, display backlight to make the display more easily seen in low light conditions, and they even have a flashlight function so that you can see what you're probing in low light conditions. Now you don't have to hold the meter in one hand and your cell phone in the other and try to do this thing. The second factor is deduced from the specific price point of the product. Now, this is brought together with the built-in features to develop a more full-bodied picture. Now, looking out at the internet for the selling price, I see that it comes in a very affordable, around $12-ish level. So what do I see as the target audience and use case for this KM200s meter, given its capabilities and its price point? Well, after looking at the price point of the meter and comparing it to other similarly priced multimeters that I found on various venues, my evaluation is that this meter appears to have been intended to be an affordable general troubleshooting multimeter to be used in diverse venues both in the field and in the shop. Now it is time to meet the meter. I am so not into unboxing videos. But at the same time, this is when we have our first impressions of the product. So if you'll pardon me, I will have a very short first impressions session with the product. let's go see what our first impressions are all about. Well, here is our KM200s. Let's take a look inside the box and see what we got. And this is first impressions. I haven't had this box open at all until just now. First thing I find is a user manual. Let's just take a quick look at the user manual. It looks like it is in several languages, like so many of them. So we have 11 pages of manual in English, indicating all of the various indicators and its functionality and accuracies, operating temperatures. Notice that it wants 0 degrees Celsius to 40 degrees Celsius. So clearly you're not going to be taking it out at 30 below zero to make measurements. 40 is pretty hot, so you could probably be out in the Sahara Desert with it. All right, now battery replacement. It doesn't actually tell you how to replace the battery here. They give no indication how to put the new battery in or replace it. So I guess we'll discover that. All right, what else do we find in the box? We find a pair of test leads. Now, traditionally, test leads, you can get some real cheap-looking test leads. So let's just open these up and see what kind of a quality that we're looking at here. And if we can get it open. They feel very flexible. Nice feel to them. Not incredibly long, but they're about, 3 feet, maybe a meter long. That's not bad. They come with protective covers on here, so before you can use them with the meter, you got to take these protective covers off of the meter connection end. And then the other end has protective covers to protect these things. Now, a lot of guys take these off and just throw them away. But if you want to maintain the nice sharp tip on the end here and to prevent yourself from getting hurt on them by reaching in your toolbox after them, it's not a bad idea to have those on. All right, what else do we have in the box? Well, we have the meter and we have a pair of inexpensive batteries here. So we'll just open up the batteries. So obviously this requires a pair of AAA batteries. Now we get to the meat of it, the meter itself. Has kind of a nice feel to it. Protective cover on the display, so let's just take that off. Now there's no rotary switch to select anything. I'll talk more about that later. Looks like it's got a protective cover on it. My guess is that the batteries have got to go in the back because there's no way to put batteries in the front. So this protective cover has to come off to put the batteries in. At least you don't have to worry about it popping off. And so here we go. Takes 2 AAA, it says, and with a Phillips head screwdriver. Now that screw isn't really captured in here. So when you go to change or put the batteries in, be mindful of this screw here because you could lose that and you don't want to do that. We'll put the batteries in that they supplied. I prefer a good Duracell battery over these inexpensive batteries, but we'll use theirs for now. And it said hello. And we'll just, nice thing about having the battery cover underneath here is that you don't have to worry about the, see it turned on when I did that. Now it's very lightweight to the feel, and that's okay. The one thing I did notice that when I took that battery cover off is it had a metal insert for the screw to screw into, and that's really good because, you know, you have these ones where they're using a plastic tapping screw, and eventually the plastic decides to not grip your screw, and then nothing works. Anyway, it's fairly lightweight. It's a nice size. So let's just take a closer look at its capabilities. I noticed that it doesn't have a rotary switch like the vast majority of its contemporaries have. That's because it automatically determines what you're trying to measure and sets its own mode and scale to match. When you turn it on, it goes into auto mode. Now it's looking out here, determining what you're trying to measure, figures out what it needs to do, will display it on the screen, what mode it's in, whether it's measuring DC voltage, AC voltage, resistance, or whatever. And, you know, that can be really handy. I mean, consider a situation here. I take my meter here, and I'm set up to measure continuity. And that's what I was doing. Now I decide, oh, I'm going to go over here and check the voltage on my AC outlet. I forget that this is in continuity mode. I stick my probes in there, and all of a sudden, boom! Well, that meter used to measure continuity. Well, you won't have that issue with the KAiWEETS because it figures out what you're trying to do and changes its mode accordingly. That's pretty cool. I also noticed that it has very nice digits here, very easily read, so that's a big plus. Now, let's answer some specific questions. And the first one that I want to answer is, what does this meter do if you are trying to measure an AC voltage that is riding a DC level? So what if I'm trying to measure an AC voltage that is riding on a DC voltage, like with this little circuit here, looking at the output on the collector of this particular transistor? Now I set the AC frequency to 60 Hertz to be sure that I fall into the sweet spot for the meter. I'm going to compare the reading of the KM200s to that of my bench DVM, which is easily 10 times more accurate. You can see here on the bench DVM that the 0.7794 volt RMS AC output of the transistor is riding a 5.175 volt DC value. So the question is, which is the KM200 going to choose? Does it measure either of these correctly? Well, let's see. Let's connect this up. The positive lead's already connected up over here with the clip lead. And the answer is, it reads the DC voltage. But my first observation is that it is really loading the circuit. It was 5.175 volts before I connected this up, and it is now 4.99 volts. So the claimed input impedance of 10 megohms of this meter cannot be reality for it to load the circuit like this. I will have to investigate this next. So it measures 4.99 volts DC here. The bench tells me I have, well, now 5.00. This says 5.00. That's really, really good. Now, to overcome the decision conundrum for the meter, I can manually change the mode with this button here. So if I push this button once, I force it to go into the DC mode, and it is reading 4.99 volts. My bench meter is reading 4.99, almost 5 volts. I'd say that this is doing a really fine job of measuring the DC voltage. Let's switch to the AC mode. And the KAiWEETS is measuring 0.753 volts RMS. The bench DVM is reading 0.7513. Again, a very nice agreement between the bench and the KAiWEETS. My only concern right now is the fact that this is loading that circuit as much as it is. So let's go see what the input impedance of this meter really is. Well, the manual says that the input impedance of this meter should be 10 megohms. And as we saw in our last test, there is significant evidence that this is, well, not the case. So we need to measure this for ourselves. I'm going to use a method that I outlined in my video on measuring the input impedance of circuits and devices. I've put a link up in the corner and down in the description to that video where I give a complete explanation. So let's go do that at the bench. So here's my setup. I have voltage coming in from the power supply here, through my step resistor, out of the step resistor to the positive input of our KAiWEETS meter. We have the negative side of the power supply connected to the negative input here. And then these two go off to my bench meter. The power supply is set for around 5 volts. What we're reading on our bench meter is 5.0478 volts. So we're looking for 2.5239 volts by increasing these. So here we are, and you'll be able to watch the progress here, but not to the resolution that I have on my bench DVM. There it is, 2.5239. So now the value of this is the input impedance of the meter. So we see 293.58 k ohms. Well, this is nowhere near the claimed 10 megohm input impedance. Now, for many applications, this will make little difference. However, you have to be aware of this if you're making a measurement which could be subject to circuit loading like our little transistor circuit was. Now, I asked a question in the introductory section about the frequency response to the AC measurement. So let's take a look at that next. I mentioned the question of the frequency response to the AC voltage reading in my introductory comments. And the manual tells me, well, a whole lot of nothing. So we have to discover this for ourselves. I set up my signal generator to provide a 4-volt RMS signal to the input of the KAiWEETS. This also is connected to my oscilloscope, so I can be sure that the voltage I'm feeding the meter stays constant across the frequencies that I'm feeding the meter. I chose the 4 volts test signal because, well, the KM200s scale is a 4-volt scale. On this 4-volt scale, the meter should read between 3.967 volts and 4.033 volts for a 4.0 volt RMS signal. Now, putting this down to 5 hertz, this is kind of all over the place. You can see that it's not very happy at 5 hertz. So let's increase the frequency to 10 hertz. And it pops out of the 4-volt scale, so I'm just going to do that and put it back in. So it jumps back into the 4-volt scale. And now at 10 hertz, you can see we have a very nice, steady signal. So we're assuming that the bottom end capability of the KAiWEETS is going to be around 10 hertz. Then from there, I moved up in frequencies, and I discovered that this meter stayed well within tolerances all the way up to and past 1.5 kilohertz. That's not bad at all. But it dropped out of tolerance at 1.9 kilohertz. Now, with that said, not every meter is exactly the same. So if it were me and I were to buy another one of these, I would assume that 1.5 kilohertz is a good upper frequency limit if I want reasonably accurate measurements. So this gives you an idea of what sorts of frequencies this lovely little meter can be counted on to give accurate readings for. So what are we going to look at next? Well, how about the no contact voltage sensing sensitivity test? That sounds like another interesting one. Well, in my introduction, I asked the question about how high the voltage needed to be detected by the no contact voltage detection mode. Now, I have to emphasize that this is designed to detect AC voltage. It will not help you if you are trying to detect DC voltage. I set up this experiment with my variable auto transformer and my outlet. This way I can adjust the voltage and see where the meter begins beeping. I'll set this aside. All right, so to use this, we turn it on. And then we hit the mode switch until the letters EF shows up. There we are. Now, the sensor is right here at the top. It says NCV there. It says NCV there. Now, this is a live outlet. I currently have, I'll read it right now, 121 volts on this outlet right now. And we have the neutral side, the wide side. We have the hot side, which is the narrow side. If I come in at the neutral side, you notice that it is not doing anything. Come in at the hot side. Now, notice it's got 3 dashes here. That's a kind of a sort of indication of how much voltage is there, as well as how fast the beeper is beeping. Now, if I go over here where I'm getting closer to the wire, I can get a much faster beep because it's closer to where the voltage is at. It is distance sensitive. The further you are away. All right, now, how low a voltage can I go right here where it's going crazy before it stops? I'm decreasing the voltage. Okay, bring it up. It just... That's right on the hairy edge there. And what do we have voltage-wise here? We have 42 volts. Okay, now, let's go back over here. Now we're just at an outlet. So you're in your house and going around trying to see if there's voltage there. How much voltage needs to be there for you to detect it in this kind of a situation? Come on, beep. There we go. And what do I have here? I have 80 volts. So to answer the question, if this doesn't beep, does that mean that there's no voltage on the outlet or in the vicinity? No, it just means that it's below its threshold. But it's still a pretty cool thing, you know. Try to find out if your circuit breaker is shut off for an outlet before you stick your fingers in there or anything else. So it's kind of a cool way to do it without having to take out your meter probes and stick them in the outlet. All right, how about the continuity responsiveness? Well, when I'm using a continuity tester, I'm often checking pin-to-pin continuity on a cable. You know, pin 1 on one end should go to pin 3 on the other end, or maybe pin 1 on this end goes to what color wire exiting the other end of the cable on the other end. And, you know, I just want to be able to move quickly from pin to pin to pin. You know, I want immediate response when contact is made. So let's see how responsive this KM200s is when using the continuity function. I'm going to start with the meter in its automatic mode. So to use continuity mode, we can just turn it on. And in auto mode, all we have to do is connect things together. A fair amount of delay on that. I wonder if it's faster if I manually set it in that mode. So I'm going to go to continuity mode. Well, it's a little bit faster, but not as responsive, of course, as my fluke, which you heard earlier. But still quite functional I would like a faster response on the continuity, especially if I have it manually set to continuity mode. Well, the last thing I'm going to take a look at will be the actual accuracy of the meter. I'm just going to quickly go through a few measurements and see how it stacks up. I have not done a full-on calibration of the meter. I did do a spot check at a few select points. The AC and DC voltage measurements look very good based on the checks that I made. I'm very pleased with those. On the other hand, the resistance measurements, which are supposed to be within plus or minus 1.2% plus 5 counts, came in just a little way out of tolerance on the low side. So here's an example. With a 2.999 k ohm resistor, the KM200s should read something between 2.958K to 3.040K, and it read 2.945K, just 13 ohms out of tolerance. And this was quite consistent across all of the values that I checked. But overall, accuracy-wise, I was pretty pleased with the meter. So what is my final evaluation of this cool little KM200s DVM from KAiWEETS? Well, considering that this little meter seems to be intended to be an affordable, general troubleshooting multimeter to be used in diverse venues, both in the field and in the shop, I think it meets this purpose and audience, especially when you consider the price point. Its size, functionality, and cost all make it quite suitable for this purpose. Of course, we do have to remember its loading effect due to its input impedance, but this is true of all multimeters to one extent or another. We also need to remember that just because the no contact voltage sense function does not indicate the presence of AC voltage, it does not mean that the circuit is completely dead. Always, always, always check before diving in. And by the way, they say this very thing in the manual. If you found this video helpful, please click on the like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, Toodle-oots.